there is nothing like drawing to learn how to draw. So the rest of this class, instead of waffling on about different concepts and different ways to think about drawing, no, what we're going to do is draw. And we're going to draw different subjects because each of us will have different strengths and weaknesses. I know that my strengths are in landscapes and in urban scenes. I also love doing simple drawings of things all around me. I know that animals and people are harder for me. We're still drawing them today, but I know for me they're harder. For some people, they're really easy. So by drawing a range of things, it means we get a bit of variety, we get a bit of fun, but also it means, we get to actually work on not just the things we're good at, but also the things we're less good, but in a less pressurised way. And with that, let's start with something fun and simple, which we can all do. And that is drawing just everyday objects. At the top of my page, we're going to do what I do to start my day. So we've got my coffee mug. So here we go. And we're going to make mini scenes as well. We're not just going to have a coffee mug. So we can see a little wobbly line, and then I'm coming back and making little bits slightly bolder. And this means that it shows us which bits are important. Like here, the weight is all coming through this dark line, which is also where the shadows will be. Similarly under here, a little bit bolder, and we've got this idea of a more 3D mug already. Tiny bit of hatching at the bottom, and hopefully that gives us a sort of really simple idea for a mug. I'm going to pop this on a table, and all we need for the table is a little line. And then where does my coffee come from? Well, I most often use a sort of French press or cafetiere. And this is, again, simple shapes. It's basically a rectangle with a slight curve at the bottom and a slight curve at the top. And then in the middle, there's all these other little lines, which are just dividing. So we've got, say, this is where the sort of plunger comes down. Underneath, we've got the dark coffee. So we can do little marks, like before we did our hatching. Remember the hatching from the last lesson? Or the naturalistic hatching, which went on our tennis ball? Well, here, like little dots to build up our sense of the coffee. Doesn't mean we can't apply light linear hatching on top as well. But the key here is that kind of creating the texture, the shorthand texture for what's going on underneath. And then the plunger kind of comes up like this, doesn't it? And ends in a little circle. And instead of making it just a 2D line, we go up and down, we get a 3D plunger. Got a little pouring spout, that's kind of a triangle on top. And the rest of the lid, which is dark. So I'm just going to hatch that all in. And this is how my coffee emerges every morning. The coffee, of course, comes a little bit higher, doesn't it? So we need to just give ourselves a little ellipse and just tiny bit of hatching. All the coffee grounds are under the plunger. And then what's important here? Well, let's make that outer line just a little bit bolder. Now, I'm not making it rigid, remember? I'm not making it rigid, I'm just making it a little bit bolder. Now, what can we possibly have alongside that? Well, why don't we come over here and we'll draw my breakfast. And this morning, I happen to have a nice croissant. And what is a croissant? Well, I'm not expecting a literal answer here. A croissant, of course, being a lovely French pastry. No, what I mean is, how do we draw it? Well, it's a series of shapes. So we've got a triangle, and we've got these kind of overlapping, you could call them triangles with their nose cut off, or you could think of them as slightly wonky rectangles. But it doesn't really matter as long as you're in your head simplifying it. And that is all on a plate. So I could now make this a top-down view, couldn't I? So the plate can come around. So you've got like a bird's eye view. And the plate's going to have a little sort of lip to it. And it doesn't matter about this being perfect. This is a little sketchy, fun drawing. So instead of trying to make my circle totally perfect, I'm going to keep it a little bit wobbly and make it just seem like it's a bit of fun, like it is actually something a human has drawn in a quick time, had a bit of fun with, not something which is trying to be too hard and photorealistic. If we wanted that, well, we'd be doing different processes over many hours, but we'd still be starting with these very simple shapes. Remember these little bits of hatching, so I can get that shadow being cast, showing how these different shapes are overlapping. And we can even pop a little bit of shadow coming in around here. So that's kind of showing how this croissant is interacting with our plate. And while we're here, why don't we, my plates are actually very boring, but why don't we draw little sort of flower-like shapes along the edge. Of course, flowers coming up as one of the lessons, but this can be a nice little intro just to drawing these simple, like repeating patterns. And that's what a lot of art is about, having simple ways to display an idea, a concept, so the viewer can understand it. And for me, at least, these are easy to understand, simple objects, which hopefully you can draw along and have a bit of fun with as well. Let's move on to something else that we all have at home. Let's draw some glasses and bottles of wine and things. Really lovely ways to sort of start building up a scene, because we can build other things into it as well. So what is a bottle of wine? Well, it's rectangle, a semicircle, and then a rectangle underneath. Remember, because it's a cylinder, it's got that overlap at the bottom. Within it, it's then got basically another rectangle, again with that kind of slightly slanted edge. But we don't need to be too clever again, we can just think of these things really simply. So this is a rectangle, but just remember to make the edge a bit sort of slanted, a bit like an ellipse. And then that's basically already done. We can make the key lines a bit more interesting. And then we can add in perhaps a little wine glass. Simple shapes. And there we go. And look how quick and loose that is. But if we want to build it up gradually, we just sort of slowly come around. Maybe we add in our little ellipse for wine. We do a little bit of hatching here to show that this is a darker area. We can hatch on the bit above to kind of show that idea of some reflections coming off. And the same down here. We pop in the edge of the table. And then the wine bottle's probably very dark, so nice big bold hatching coming across it. And even cross hatching. So cross hatching, unlike these simple marks, cross hatching where we go across each other, that builds up even more idea of the kind of tone of what's going on, the kind of value or darkness of an object. And we can, again, make this a bit more interesting. Let's draw a little sort of, maybe a little sort of church-like building going on our bottle. They've often got lovely illustrations, so we can make it a bit more interesting like that. And in the front, simple ovals, little circles, overlapping, a bit chaotic. And if we neaten up some of those edges, if we make some of them bold to show the weight, show the interaction, the overlapping nature of these, then perhaps what we've got is a little bunch of grapes. Just something a bit fun. Make all these things interact with the table by having a simple shadow coming off the bottom. And that's our second little household everyday scene. Perhaps I'm getting too focused on food and wine though, so let's just draw something else slightly interesting. So what about drawing our kind of living room? Well, this can get complex, it can feel scary, but let's draw a simple, my chair, my favourite chair. And all this is, again, is simple shapes. So I just find, what's the shape at the end of the armrest that I can see? What's the shape of the back? Again, I'm not trying to be too neat. And all I'm doing is building up these simple shapes. And as we do that, we can find, there's a square here. There's another square here, which kind of gets overlapped by this circle. There's a kind of bigger square here. There's a rectangle. There's another rectangle. And because all these lines are a bit sort of light and flimsy, if we come back and make them bolder, we find the key lines within these shapes. Hopefully, what I expect to happen is these very simple shapes will kind of emerge or merge or conjoin or whatever word you want to use, but they will start to form my favourite armchair. bit of simple hatching, and we can show that this is darker here. Adding these little extra bits to these other rectangles perhaps will make it a little more obvious that these are pillows. Giving these little edges to this bigger square will show that this is a 3D object, especially if we do a little bit of hatching on it. We can make these pillows stand out a little bit more. And then all of this is in shadow because it's kind of underneath. So there you go, really simple, but actually quite effective and quite fun and very approachable. The actual design of my armchair is kind of like a stripy tartan kind of effect. So I'm going to draw very light lines. Remember the idea of quality of line. So these very light lines now are not trying to be structural. They're not trying to overtake these bolder lines, which are showing the real shape of the armchair. Instead, like here, see how these little flowers are lighter? By keeping them lighter, it's showing that they are describing the object, not taking over the shape. They're not as important. They're decorative, a bit like applying a texture. And it's time now to have a bit of fun and fill up the rest of your sketchbook. There are loads of things around the house that if you want, you can just get out there and start drawing. Perhaps, look, open up your fridge, get your food, your cans or bottles of milk and your yogurts on the top shelf, all sketched in. Maybe sketch something as funny and odd as your vacuum cleaner. Here's mine, sort of zooming its way towards us. Your TV and what's underneath it. I've got my PlayStation there and lots of little DVDs and even a couple of books on the side. And talking about books, there's always a bookshelf in many of our houses, and these are really fun, lovely things filled with books, ornaments, and all sorts of character that we can just dive into. Just like that, find the things lying around your house, things which just may not look that interesting, but we think, you know what, we can actually make a really lovely sketch out of this. Have a bit of fun, fill up your page, feel confident, and don't worry if it goes a bit wrong. It's all about the experimentation and just practicing by doing.